Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I am so excited with this new project that I just completed, this vintage 1940s apron that I made with a beautiful African fabric. I made this apron for a friend of mine who is a two-time cookbook author and is about to start her own cooking channel. And I am so excited that in today's episode, I am bringing you guys step-by-step tutorial of how I put this project together. So if you're a beginner sewer and you're just getting into sewing and wanting to build your skills, this is a very good sew along for you because I touch on different skills like how to make gathers, how to make ties, how to sew ties and turn it right side out, things like that. So I feel like this is going to be very beneficial for you. So definitely, watch it from beginning to end. Also, Christmas is close by. So if you're looking for a nice personalized present for that special person in your life who loves to cook, who loves to be in the kitchen, you just want to bring a smile to their face, this apron is definitely a good one. So consider that as well. So if you're new to my channel, welcome. I really appreciate you stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. It helps me a lot. And also hit that notification bell so you know whenever I put out a new content. I appreciate all of you watching and I appreciate all of your feedback. Make sure that you leave me a note in the comment section below. I love to engage with you. So without much ado, let us jump into the video. So for this particular view, here are the pieces that you need. You need piece number 11. This is the apron front and you cut one unfold of a fabric. You need piece number 12. This is the pocket and you cut one. You need piece number 13. This is the apron back and you cut two. You need piece number 14. This is the yoke and tie end and you need to cut two unfold. You need piece number 15. This is the bib and you need to cut two of this. You need piece number 16. This is the shoulder strap and you need to cut four. And finally, you need piece number 17 and this is the guide for ruffle and you need to cut two of this. And of course, to put all of the pieces together, you need to get a coordinating thread. So before you go ahead and cut all of the pieces, make sure that you iron the pattern pieces and you also iron your fabric. It makes for a very clean project. And once you have gone ahead to cut all of your pieces, make sure that you mark all of the notches using either a scissors or a notch guide that looks like this. I like this because it's very easy to just go clip, clip, clip. Marking all of the notches and transferring all of the markings really makes your project a lot easier. And then when you're marking the notches, make sure that for multi-sized pieces that you're marking the size that you want to sew. So we're going to be starting with pattern piece number 15. So I'm going to take the pins out and with the right side facing, this is the right side of the fabric. That's the printed side where the fabric is more beautiful and this is the wrong side. And so with the right side facing, go ahead and stitch this closed at the top of the bib using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Don't forget to pin. Your work will be so much neater if you actually take the time to pin your fabric together. Okay, so I went ahead and stitched that together. And what I'm going to do now is iron it so that I have a clean seam. and you want to go ahead and iron it to the side of whichever one you've decided it's going to be the facing. So I'm going to use this side as the front, and I'm going to use this side as the facing. So I'm going to go ahead and iron this towards the facing. So once it's ironed, I'm going to go ahead and stitch the seam allowance to the facing, very close to the seam that I already made. And what that does is when you turn it to the other side, it prevents this later on from turning away from the seam allowance. It holds it. So I went ahead and did the second stitch, and this is what's called understitching. And the idea of this is to secure this to the facing and to make sure that this always stays in shape that way. So the next step is to go ahead and machine baste this the front and the facing of the bib together. So let's pin, and remember, machine basting is when you use like the longest stitching length that your machine has, and it's basically to secure two sides together if you intend to join that particular piece to another piece, so to make sure that nothing moves while you're doing that. So I've gone ahead to baste all along the bib. This is what a regular stitch looks like, very nice and fine, and this is what a basting stitch looks like, very long and potentially not strong and steady. So the next piece you're going to need is piece number 16. I'm just going to make sure that I have all of the circles marked before I take the pattern piece off. This piece, you have 4 pieces because you're going to use 2 of them as the front, and then you're going to use 2 of them as the facing. So place your pattern number 16 this way, such that your right side is facing down and your pointy edge is pointing away from the bib. And then with right side facing, pin the bib to the strap on both sides. Just check to make sure that when it's all put together, it makes sense. Yep, so I'm going to go ahead and stitch these 2 together, just back stitching here to make sure that you secure the stitch at the bottom and at the top. Okay, so this is all done as usual. We're going to go ahead and iron it put. Keep it nice and tidy. And I'm going to, of course, iron the seam allowance towards the shoulder strap, like so. And using my fabric scissors, I'm gonna go ahead and trim the seam allowance to as little as possible. So to finish the shoulder straps, we're going to go ahead and put the facing, and with right side together, put the facing to the shoulder strap and match all your notches and pin them together. You should be matching double notches on this. And once you're done pinning together, we're going to go ahead and sew from the top of the bib. We're going to go ahead and sew the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure that you identify where your dots are on the top and back stitch at those dots to reinforce the stitches, and then you're going to go around and come back and sew all the way down here. This piece will not be sewn together because we're going to use the space to turn the strap over, so and I'll be showing you that later on. So this is all stitched up now, and I'm going to iron it and then go ahead and trim the seams. So once you're done trimming the shoulder strap, we then go ahead and using the space that we have left turn over the shoulder strap right side out. And here I'm using my ruler. It was a little bit difficult for me to do it by hand. The ruler really helped to pull it out. And then once you're done, just go ahead and make it as straight as possible and iron it. So the next step is to go ahead and create the ruffle on the shoulder, and the pattern piece has us using lace, but because the fabric is already beautiful by itself, I decided to create a ruffle using a part of the fabric because I think that it will go really well. And so instead of cutting 2 pieces of this pattern piece, I decided to cut 4 pieces of the pattern piece and sew 2 of them together, just to give the ruffle a little bit of weight. So instead of having 1 piece of this and hemming the edges, I decided to make it 2 pieces, and I sewed the 2 pieces together and I folded it to the other side so that the 2 right sides are facing outward. And because I'm going to go ahead and gather this side of this piece so it fits to this, which is way shorter right now, I wanted to stitch it together so that when I'm gathering, the fabric itself is not moving with respect to each other. So that's why I went ahead and I did this stitching. So right now for the gathering, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a basting stitch at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and basting stitch is the longest machine stitch. I am not going to back stitch at the end. In fact, I'm going to let it have tails on both ends, and then I'm going to move away from the seam allowance, which is 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm going to move to a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance away from the main seam, and then I'm going to do another straight basting stitch. So at the end, I'm going to have 2 basting stitches, and I'm going to have a long tail on both sides, and then I'm going to use those 2 stitches to gather this and make something that is much longer into something that is equal in length to the shoulders. So I'm going to go do that at the machine for both sides, and I'll be right back. So I'm in regular stitch right now of 1, and if I just click here on my machine, you will see that my stitch length is 2.5 right now, and that's my regular sewing stitch length. But for basting, I'm going to go ahead and set that to the longest that I have, which is 5. Okay, so I've gone ahead to do the basting stitch, and I have 2 basting stitches about a 1/4 of an inch away from each other. And the reason that you have to do 2 is really for redundancy, so that as you're pulling to make the gathers, if one of the thread fails, you still have the other one to work with. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the 2 top stitches and separate them from the 2 bottom stitches. And what I did here was just tie a knot on the 2 bottom stitches to get it away from me as I'm doing this. And then you're going to start patiently holding onto this thread and really just gathering the fabric. Just be a little bit careful as you pull the thread, just so that you're not kind of cutting the thread away. And then as you pull the thread and make these gathers really close to the thread, you have to kind of work your way down the fabric. It takes some time, but you get there eventually. So that's what I want to do. So I went ahead and completed the gathering for this, and once I was done with the gathering, I attached it to the front of the apron. And to do that, you have to attach it to the front of the apron with the right side facing, so that when you're done stitching it together, the right side would be out, and it would look like that. I can't wait to see how pretty this is going to be. I'm just so excited. And the important thing to do once you're done gathering it is to make sure that you iron it even as it is gathered. And as you attach it here, you have to kind of move the gathers a little bit so that it's as evenly distributed as possible. It's not going to be perfect, but you can distribute it evenly and pin. I did that for both sides, and I'm gonna go ahead and stitch. So the next thing that we're gonna do here is to join the apron front, which is the pattern piece number 11. We do have one of that piece, and it's cut on fold, and join that to the apron back, which is pattern piece number 13, and we have two of that. And before I go ahead and take out the pattern piece, I'm going to make sure that I have all of the circles marked. So before I go through the step of attaching the front pattern piece to the side pattern piece, I'm going to take care of the pocket. So I'm going to prepare the pocket right now and attach it to the piece. So the pocket is pattern piece number 12, and we have one piece of the pattern piece number 12, and that's because we're going to have to fold it like that to make the pocket. And before I take out the pattern piece, I'm gonna go ahead and mark where that fold line is. So that's the fold line, that's the fold line. Essentially what we want to do is fold it in half, and you want to fold it in half with the right sides facing, so that when I stitch it and I turn it inside out, the right side will be out and the wrong side will be inside. And then I'm going to take this to the machine, and then I'm going to stitch this all around this way, and I'm going to leave a small hole here just so that I can turn the pocket right side out. So I stitched the pocket all around, but then I left an opening at the bottom. And what I'm going to do now is turn the pocket right side out. And before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and make clippings around this corner, just so when I turn it around, it stays nice and round. And I'm gonna be very careful to make sure that I don't cut into the pocket. Let's see. I have this really handy tool for pushing out corners. So for things like this, you could just use it to push out that corner like that. Like that. And then so I'm going to go ahead and iron it now, but what I want to achieve when I iron that is have this really straight edge, and then under here, because I have this open hole, I'm going to iron it by the seam allowance, and I'm going to go ahead and put a stitch right there. And then also to kind of make the pocket rigid, I'm gonna go ahead and make a stitch, a very clean one line stitch here, because the stitch that I'm gonna make is gonna be showing when the garment is completed. I'm going to make it as neat as possible. So I'm actually going to go and put a straight line to make sure that it's perfectly straight. So this is the center front piece, and I'm going to go ahead and put the pocket in on the center front piece. And I already have this markings here for where the pocket is supposed to go on. So I'm going to align the pocket right now. And then I'm going to go and stitch. So I'm going to go and stitch the pocket. Well, I'm going to follow the same stitches that I used to close the gap, just so that at the end of the day you don't see that stitch there. So I'm going to go and stitch using that same seam allowance, and I'm just going to sew it all around. And because it's a visible stitch, I'm going to try to make it as smooth and straight as possible. Okay, the pocket's nice and secure. There you go. You have a nice pretty pocket there. And I've gone ahead to stitch the pocket to the front. So the next step now is to attach the center to the two backs, or to the two sides. And I'm going to do that on each side with right side facing each other. And I'm going to try my best to make sure that I match the pattern, just so that it looks continuous once I am done. So. So make sure when you do this, the right sides of your fabric are facing each other. This is the right side of the front, and this is the right side of the side. I'm just going to put a quick press on it just to have smooth edges. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch the sides, and also, as you can see, this looks very wide, and that's because it's supposed to be gathered. So like when we did the shoulder gathers, we're going to go ahead and put 2 lines of basting stitch on the entire length of this fabric once it's joined together, and then we're going to use those 2 lines to gather the fabric to be the desired length. So I'll see you guys when it's time to gather. So for the gathering, I went ahead and did the double basting stitch, which is just the longest stitch that your machine can make. And when you're doing that, remember not to back stitch at the beginning and the end, and also remember to keep this 2 stitches as separate as possible. When I was making it, I got really close here, but I decided to still give it a try, and hopefully it works pretty well because I was careful not to let them cross. Okay, so before I go ahead and start gathering, I'm going to hem all of the edges because it's much easier to hem it straight than to hem it when it's gathered. And the hemming allowance on both sides is 1 1/4. So I am going to iron it 1 1/4, and then just iron the edges in a little bit to give it that clean hem finish. Okay. So I've gone ahead to do 2 stitches along the top edge, a little bit smaller than the seam allowance, and I'm going to use these stitches to gather this this front and side that I've attached together. So for each of the stitches, you have the top thread and the bobbin thread, and so you want to separate the top thread and you want to also separate out the bottom threads. Okay, and using the top thread, you're going to be holding both threads together. That gives it some strength. So using the top thread, so using both thread on the top, you just keep pulling it. Be careful not to pull too much, because if you put too much, you could break the thread. So once you pull it and you gather the fabric like so, you hold the fabric and you move the gathers inwards. So to make the yoke and tie, I'm going to go ahead and attach the front to the facing of the pieces, and this is piece number 14. And with this, I'm deviating slightly from the instructions that came with the pattern, because honestly they were just driving me crazy and I was never getting it right. So I decided to use my own method. So we'll see how it turns out. So I'm going to go ahead and put right sides together. And I'm going to stitch along the top of the two pieces, and I'll be back. So once you're done stitching the two pieces together, go ahead and iron and then turn it right side out. And we are ready to join this to the skirt piece and finally to the top piece. The next part is going to be attaching the skirt of the apron to this piece, and then finally we'll attach this piece to the top of the apron. Let's see how that goes. And if you took note, you have two circles that I marked out of the pattern right here, and this is going to be a guide for attaching the skirt piece, because remember that we gathered the skirt piece, and so this will help us to figure out how long the skirt piece needs to be. The front piece of the skirt would have to be from this inner dot, and then the two side pieces of the skirt will have to fit to here, and the rest of this would be the tie. So let's go ahead and do that first. So this is the side piece right now, and it's very short. I'm just going to measure it and see that it fits to right there. So you can see right now it's too short, so I'm gonna go ahead and just lengthen it a little bit while making sure that the gather is even. So I'm actually gonna go ahead and pin it in place temporarily, and then we're going to go ahead and do the same for all the other sections. And once it's all done, we're going to pin and go ahead and attach it. The way that I'm approaching this is to use this front piece as my front and attach with right side facing this piece to that piece, and then I'm going to use this one as the facing. So I'm going to use it to make sure that I have a clean finish at the end. So let's go ahead and do that. And because of the gathering, you want to make sure that you pin as much as possible. Hey, I'm back, and I am loving it. So I attached this, the tie, and what's it called again? So I've attached the tie to the apron skirt, and I'm going to go ahead and just tidy it a little bit. I'm going to trim the seam allowance, and then I'm going to turn this over to cover the seam allowance and give me that very clean finish. Okay, so I trimmed the seam allowances already, and I only trimmed the allowance on the gathered skirt piece because it's the one that is more bulky. And so now I'm going to go ahead and iron the seam that I made, and I'm going to iron the seam allowance up towards the waist, towards the band actually. Okay, so to finish the yoke and tie, and also to finish the seam here so that it's clean, go ahead and turn this two pieces of the tie so that the right side is facing, and then go ahead and stitch by seam allowance down this way and all the way along the tie up to where the apron skirt is. And then once we're done doing that stitching, we're gonna go ahead and turn it right side out. So I'm done doing the stitching. I am gonna go ahead and just trim this corner a little bit, just so when we push it out, it forms a really nice corner over there. So that's that. And I'm going to go ahead and bring this right side out. And this one is really easy. I use my finger. So I put my big thumb inside of the belt, and I just squeeze it until I get to the end. So I put my thumb up to that end, and then I place my finger here, and as I bring the thumb out, I put the finger. Yes! I got it right this time. Okay, so now it's right side out. I'm just gonna try to bring as much of the corner out as possible. Ironing is going to make so much of a difference on your garment making. It's a good habit to develop when you're sewing. I'm gonna go ahead and iron this side as well. Okay, so to finish the seam on the inside of the skirt piece, what we're going to do is make sure that you have your skirt piece seam allowance trimmed so that it's nice and small, and then you're going to turn this over and just continue with the seam allowance the way that you've sewn it from the belt, and just turn that piece in and try as much as possible to make it cover the seam allowance, the stitching line. And I'm going to go ahead and pin it in place. Okay, so there you go. Just try to make sure I pin them as much as possible. Leave little room for error. And then once I'm done, actually now that I'm done, I'm going to go ahead, turn it around and stitch as close to the stitching line on the top as possible. And I will be back. So matching the dots on the tie to the edge of the upper side of the top section of the apron pin, and I'm gonna go ahead and stitch it, but I'm gonna try to stitch it very close to the edge, pivoting right at the center there. So the final step is to attach the shoulder strap, and the way that I did it is just to bring it all the way back, align it to the circle that you marked from the pattern, and essentially just put it straight inside. So it's gonna look like this on the inside. And what I'm going to do is I'm gonna go ahead and top stitch it as clean as possible, and just to make it look a little bit professional, I'm gonna go ahead and put 2 stitches very close to each other, and I'm going to do it on both sides. And that is the end. We're done. Thank you guys for watching to the end. I hope that you've enjoyed it and you have picked up some skills along the way. I am so proud of how this project has turned out, and I am so excited to pack it up and ship it over to my friend, and I really hope that she loves it. Guys, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. It really helps me out with my progress here on YouTube. And if you're a beginner sewer, I have some really helpful content for you, so don't forget to check it out. And until next time, peace.